Hello, my name is Camilla Elliott. I am Professor of Literature and Media in the Department of English Literature and Creative Writing at Lancaster University. And I've made a series of 3 videos talking about how Wuthering Heights was constructed as a classic. In part 1, I looked at early reviews of Wuthering Heights, which underscore that it did not meet the literary standards of its own day and was considered to be an appallingly terrible book by many people, although there were people who felt its power and were both attracted and repulsed by it. In this part 2 of our series, we're going to look at how later criticism of the novel worked to sanitize what horrified people before or to celebrate it. And in the final part, we're going to look at how some film and television adaptations of Wuthering Heights created Wuthering Heights as a literary classic. So we're going to look now in this section at how later criticism celebrated, sanitized, and philosophized away the things that early reviewers found horrifying and brutal, the things that today would characterize sociopaths, psychopaths, child abusers, wife beaters, and people who torture animals, people who commit cruel revenges against their enemies, people who bankrupt other people, break their hearts and destroy them, all of which Heathcliff did. Let's have a quick look back at some early reviews by way of contrast to what we're going to be looking at subsequently. So these initial reviews said that the book wants relief. This reviewer wanted a few glimpses of sunshine. Another reviewer asked for green spots of rest where the mind can linger with satisfaction rather than being traumatized and shocked and horrified and terrorized by the relentless pace of this novel. What's really strange to me is that as early as the 2nd edition, which was just a couple of years later, we have critics who are performing this work of softening and providing relief from the initial shock of reading this novel. Sidney Dobell writes, he puts these fearful pictures into a soft focus past memory and says, "One looks back at the whole story as to a world of brilliant figures in an atmosphere of mist, shapes that come out upon the eye and burn their colours into the brain and depart into the enveloping fog." So he is casting a kind of mistiness and a softening atmosphere over the shocking, horrific events and characters of the novel that traumatized so many readers. And he's describing a process where they burn and then they depart into a kind of fogginess. That's something, if you'd like to think about, you can pause this video, discuss it with people you're with, write some thoughts about it. Has that happened to you? What do you think is going on here? One of the things you can think about is the 2nd edition included a biography of Emily Bronte by her sister, and you can think about perhaps whether that helped. So if you want to, pause the video now, and then when you're ready, press play. As the 19th century progressed, we have critics who are starting to celebrate the evil and the villainy in this book, or to somehow redeem it through other means. So in 1857, we have a critic who celebrates that Heathcliff is the greatest villain, second only to Iago, and with no one to match him in any other literature apart from Shakespeare. So we're starting to get Emily Bronte and her characters elevated by association with the most famous, the most popular, the most respected English literary writer, William Shakespeare. And what this does is this kind of distances Heathcliff, even though he's set in the Yorkshire Moors in the 19th century, it puts him into the Renaissance with Shakespeare and gives some kind of padding and distancing. Algernon Swinburne was a rebel poet. He liked to stir up the status quo, and he was absolutely obsessed with Emily Bronte. He saw her as a tragic poet, and he felt that she transfigured tyranny and brutality into something lofty and powerful by being a tragic poet. And he calls her writing poetry. So it takes it out of the realm of literary criticism, of novel criticism, and puts it into the domain of poetry. And we see John Skelton takes it out of novels into the domain of great drama. What this does is it detaches Wuthering Heights from the demands that prose fiction ought to have this mimetic realism, this naturalness, this moral message, civilized effect on its readers. So by putting it with Shakespeare, by putting it with poetry, Emily Bronte is sort of rescued from all this early novel criticism. When we get into the 1920s and 30s, we have criticism that starts to celebrate it because criticism and ideas about art and art's role in society, all of those views are changing. After World War I, there was a loss of faith in literature's ability to civilize, to improve, to make the world a better, more peaceful, more moral, more profitable place. World War I absolutely devastated faith in human progress, and this novel became a cult classic in the 1920s as artists flew away from realism and morality to other kinds of art following the debacle that was World War I. Surrealists were very drawn to this novel. Louis Buñuel was one, and he particularly was attracted to its notion of l'amour fou, that's mad love, and its mixture with hatred. In fact, in 1932, he wrote a screenplay for Wuthering Heights, and it wasn't produced until 1954, but he was already thinking about taking this novel and putting it into another media form, which we'll be looking at more generally in part 3 of this playlist. Literary critics continue to do the Shakespeare name dropping and philosophize the novel to do away with its raw brutality. The critic C.P. Sanger decided it was a Shakespearean romance rather than a tragedy because it has two generations. So Shakespeare has comedies that end with a marriage, tragedies that end with a death, but his romances start with the first part being a tragedy and then the second part being a comedy that works to create a whole that is a romance where one generation does something tragic, another generation redeems it. And this maybe could be thought of in terms of World War I. Maybe there was some hope resurging that the new generation would be able to redeem the mistakes of the generation that got us into war. Wuthering Heights became treated seriously and started moving towards classic status with Lord David Cecil's early Victorian novelists. And he took all these brutal, horrific human acts and relationships and savagery and elevated it into the domain of a philosophical cosmic drama which represented not actual people in 19th century Britain on the Yorkshire moors, but larger cosmic forces. It was symbolic, it was representative of depersonalized, dehumanized themes. And that was another major way to redeem this novel from its early criticism. By 1949, Melvin R. Watson could say, Wuthering Heights is now generally acknowledged to be one of the greatest English novels, but it has gained this recognition only after a battle with the critics and general public, which has lasted a large part for the 100 years since its publication. So that is the end of the later criticism. There's plenty more examples, but this is just to give you a whistle-stop tour. Other videos in this playlist look at the negative or mixed early reviews of the novel, and part 3 turns to look at the way in which film and television adaptations of Wuthering Heights have acted as forms of literary criticism, forms of cultural criticism, popular criticism of the novel, and have also contributed to sanitizing Wuthering Heights, but also more recently in attempts to return it to its more savage and primitive and shocking roots. I hope that some of you will want to think about studying English literature at university, any university, but if you're interested in English at Lancaster, you can check out our website. Feel free to contact us with any questions. We'd be delighted to speak with you.